Hello, everybody. Scott Golden here. The 11th of April, 2020, and half out of inspiration and half out of boredom, I'm putting this video up. One of my favorite YouTube content creators just put up I've been bullied story time, and so while I was having a snack. Peanut M&Ms, by the way. If you don't like peanut M&Ms, I think you don't belong on the planet, unless you're allergic to peanuts, in which case we can give you a pass. But anyhow, one of my favorite YouTubers and one of the YouTubers who got me through being in lockup in a nursing facility for 15 months. Her name is Molly Burke. If you don't already follow her, I don't know where you've been. Anyway, she's blind, and she is probably one of the people that I go to for inspiration on a consistent basis. She's just a phenomenal woman, and if most of the women on the planet could be 1/10 of the woman she shows herself to be, and obviously I've never met her. Maybe it's all stage presence. Who knows? But if the majority of women on the planet could be 1/10 of the woman that she professes to be, we'd have a whole different planet. It's really cool. Anyway, especially if you're a client of mine, I'm going to give you homework, and that's subscribe to Molly and go listen to her, because she's one of the few people. She's one of about 2 or 3 people that I go and seek out when I'm down. And yes, believe it or not, for those that work with me, I do have down moments too. And so anyway, she was brave enough to share her bullied story. And so I'm going to give you a few bullied anecdotes of my own. I think one of the things I like about doing the YouTube channel now is it'll give me a chance, especially for my clients. And you know that one of the things I do is I create this channel for you to have a resource when you don't have access to a client session. And so obviously I hope this grows into the millions, and I can donate some YouTube money to worthy causes and do some really cool things. But while it's still a small tribe of us, I want this channel to also be a place where you can get to know me a little more. Obviously, when I'm working with you, I get to know you, but this channel would be an outlet way for you to get to know me. And so a little bit of background for those who aren't familiar. I have cerebral palsy. I'm blind in one eye, and I'm one fall away from being paralyzed from the neck down. I'm also wheelchair bound. Now, this happened from birth, and there's conjecture, to say the very least, about what caused this, and I'm kind of day late, dollar short. Doesn't really matter at this point, medical malpractice or not, whatever. Who cares, right? Like, almost 40 years later, a little late to the party to try and figure it out. Anyway, I went through bullying my entire life. Unfortunately for me, my first bullying experience was at the hands of my own parents, both of whom had untreated, diagnosed but unflushed out mental illness. And so I went through severe abuse of every kind: physical, emotional, mental, sexual, all sorts of stuff. And I don't say that for sympathy. I just say it for statement of fact. And so my view on bullying was very different than the average person. I thought it was normal to get picked on. I thought it was average every day for people not to like you. And I can now look back with the wisdom of being out of that situation for, over a decade and go, that probably wasn't pretty normal, was it? Anyway, I'll just take you through a few bullying stories here, and hopefully it gives some courage, especially to young people. One of the things I want to do in 2020 and 2021 is get out onto the motivational speaking circuit. I hope that this video, this audio, and I'll explain in this track why it's only an audio and not a video. In any event, my first real bullied experience probably happened 7th grade year. Up to that point, I had been pretty lucky. I mean, it was hard to make friends, and you had the kids that would avoid you because they were scared of the wheelchair, or the kids that would avoid you because you couldn't run with them and play sport. But for the most part, it wasn't until I got to middle school that I really experienced the whole, like, target on your back, try to knock you out, bully type stuff. And it all started because I made a really dumb choice. So let's back up for a second. Obviously, sexuality, and maybe I'll make a video about dating and sexuality for a disabled person somewhere in the future. Comment below if that's something that you would enjoy or think you could learn something from, and I'd be willing to do it if there's enough of a response. Anyhow, but so 6th grade year, I met a girl, and as want to do, I wanted to have a girlfriend just like everybody else. I figured the bullies would leave me alone if I was more normal and had a girlfriend. Now, keep in mind, I'm disabled by this point. I'm probably about 130 to 150 pounds, so I'm kind of scrawny, kind of small. And I'm wheelchair bound, so I'm not much to look at. Certainly, my teenage self didn't think so. And so, you know, this girl, she was probably 250-ish pounds. And I won't name her to save her pride and her anonymity and confidentiality and all that stuff. But we'll call her Kelly, and that is nowhere near her name, but we'll call her Kelly. And anyway, so I approached Kelly, and people say you should date her, and I'm like, well, people make fun of her because she's fat. People make fun of me because I'm in a chair. At least we'd have that much in common, right? Like, we could open with, what's the worst thing someone's ever said to you, right? And so I figured that would be a perfectly acceptable thing to do. Anyway, and so one thing leads to another, and I start to date this girl. And then the aspect of sexuality comes into it, and we start flirting with that, and blah, blah, blah. Well, all the while, these people who I thought were my friends and later realized, because I grew a brain, that they weren't, were always asking for updates on my relationship with Kelly. And so they'd be like, hey, how's it going? Have you closed the deal yet? And like, no, I have no clue what I'm doing. Thank you, but no. And then it was right about the summer of 6th grade going into 7th grade, and the members of a sports team all came together. There was about 9 or 10 of them. And they all came together, and they all came up to me one day, and they said, hey, we'll give you $20 a piece if you sleep with her. I said, what? Right? Like, I'm like, this is awkward. I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't think I can probably do this, but it's $120. I'll figure it out, right? And so, and I'm laughing because it's just such a ridiculous story, right? Like, here's this dorky, awkward kid who's like, $120. I can buy video games. I'll figure out how to convince this girl to get naked. And so, this opportunity presents itself, and we're hanging out, and I use my awkward-ish charm, and so one thing leads to another, and yeah, we close the deal in probably the most awkward copulation ever to exist on the history of the planet Earth, at least up until the last 20 years. And it's awkward, and it's uncomfortable, and neither one of us really thought much of doing it afterwards, and, it was kind of like, did that really just happen? Well, fast forward, somehow our indiscussions lead to a rift in our relationship, as often happens with preteens and teenagers. And so the next several months, we're still together, but then she makes a whole different group of friends, one of which didn't like me at all for various reasons. And we'll call her Amber. And so Amber hated the fact that I lived. She hated the fact that I breathed. She hated the fact I was conceived. She hated everything about my existence. And so one day I go to the lunchroom, and keep in mind, I hated being in crowds. Oddly enough, even though I've been in entertainment for a dozen years, a little inside baseball, unless I'm the speaker or doing doing something where I belong there, I still to this day hate being in crowds. I can do it if I have a purpose, but like just walking around a mall or wheeling around a mall, I despise it. It's awkward. It's uncomfortable. It's no fun. So anyway, we're in this lunchroom of about 150, 200 kids, and this girl who's brand new to the school, she passes me a clipboard. And I read it, and it says, "This is to certify that we, the students of XYZ school, wish for," and my legal name, "to be expelled because he's disabled and ugly." Now, this poor girl had no idea, absolutely no idea, that she just handed to me the petition to get me banned from the school. Like, number one, who does this? Number two, what the heck am I supposed to do? And number three, and here's the worst part, there were several dozen signatures of kids that actually signed off on this thing. And I was like, okay, what do I do? And I've always been the outside thinker. I've always been the person who does the unthinkable or the unimaginable just to see how people will react. And so I signed it as myself. I literally signed up for me to get kicked out of school. And I made sure it got back to Amber. And she goes, and I'll never forget, about 2 days later, she comes up to me and goes, "You're stupid." I said, "Why?" She goes, "Because you signed a petition to get yourself kicked out of school." I said, "Look, at least then I'd be part of the popular crowd, because that seems to be the really popular thing around here." And she just walked away completely lost. But on the inside, I was crushed, right? Like, here I am, this kid, and I'm going home, and I'm being abused, and I'm being sexually traded, and I'm being sold, and I have no beginning of concept of, like, I don't belong anywhere, right? Like, I don't have good friends. I don't have people that I can count on. I had like one, maybe two friends. I had very little else going on. And so then it's like, there is a fun little aside to the story. So finally she gives up and finds another target. And that's really cool because I needed the break. Fast forward about 3 years, and we're in 10th grade. And I had avoided Kelly like the plague ever since we had our falling out. Like, it was just, I'd go on the other side of the hallway. I'd avert her gaze. I would do anything to avoid dealing with this. And so one day we're both, now let's back up for a second. I don't get into religion on this channel. I don't get into politics. There's a few things that I don't do just because I don't think it's relevant. But for the sake of the story, I'll share that I've had an interesting relationship with Christianity for since I was 15. And I was in a phase of my life where I was super hyper-Christian. And so I thought, hey, let's go confess my sins to girl over here that I slept with. And, she probably doesn't know that I got paid to sleep with her. And so that's kind of awkward. Let me go confess this sin over here. So one day I pulled her aside, and I was like, hey, can I talk to you? And it's like, yeah, why? And it's like, remember when I got to tell you, and I unfolded the story how this group of kids from a sports team at school had approached me about, getting paid to be with her in that way. And she looks at me and doesn't skip a beat, doesn't even blink, and she goes, you too? And what I didn't know at the time that this had happened was the female component of the same team had approached her about being paid to have a physical relationship with me. So we both had a very interesting experience, and I never quite figured out how that all happened. Ridiculous story. So anyway, we fast forward to 10th grade year, and two really important things happened in my life. Number one, I figured out that adults other than my parents could be bullied. And number two, I got into the entertainment industry. And these things are important for the bullying story for a number of reasons. Now, I learned that an adult other than my parents could be a bully. I had a teacher, and her role in my life was she was supposed to be my 10th grade English teacher. And we'll call her Mrs. Nash. And anyway, Mrs. Nash was one of these really fake, like Pam Anderson flotation device fake people. And I have always been a good reader of people. I can read your expression. I can read your body language. I can read your intention through how you speak. It's just something I had to learn to do to cope with being an abused kid. And so I met her the first day, and immediately, like, my spidey senses went off. Like, this woman isn't genuine. She's not legit. Something's wrong here. And she, she did the cat that ate the canary grin. And, hi, how are you, Scott? Are you okay? And it's like, all right, you have some sort of issue. I don't know if it's lack of oxygen to your brain. I don't know if you've been dropped on your head. I don't know if you're just weird, but you've got issues. And so I was uncomfortable with this because I figured I'd have to deal with this person for a year, and I really didn't want to do this. And so I was like, I wonder if she would grade me different because I'm disabled, right? And so it's like, I'm going to try this hypothesis. So the first assignment she gave us was like some rinky-dink paper, and I specifically made like 4 or 5 mistakes that would take me down a grade point, right? Like, I planned them out. I marked them on my rough draft on my computer, and then I handed it in. And I'll never forget, 2 days later, she handed me the paper back, and it's got 100% a smiley face, like the biggest, dorkiest, red marker smiley face I've ever seen. Like, I think the smiley face was high on acid or something. And right then I was like, okay, this is horrible. Like, I'm right. She's prejudiced. And so I'm like, what do I do with this? And I go to my resource teacher, and I had an individualized education program. So if I had any educational problems, I could immediately go to this teacher and be like, hey, I need an advocate, help, And so I went to her and I was like, Miss Nash is prejudiced. She's prejudiced against disabled people, and I don't like it. And this teacher was like, how do you know? And I'm like, I have proof. And she's like, you can't have proof. It's like a week into the school year. It's like, no, I have proof. I felt it, and so I proved my hypothesis. So I pulled out the paper that had been corrected and all this. And then I pulled out the one that had the errors on it. I said, look at this and look at this. She sits there for about 5 minutes, and she goes, we got a problem, don't we? And I'm a person, and I'm still this way to this day. It takes a lot to tick me off, but once you tick me off, there ain't no going back. And I was about 3/4 of the way there. And this teacher says to me, what do you want done? And I said, I want out of her class. I said, I don't care if they take her job. Like, I'm not going to take food off her table. And that's still a thing with me to this day. Like, you can kick me in the groin, you can steal from me, you can do whatever, and I'm not going to snitch on you and go to the cops. And part of that is I have seen corruption in agencies like police forces and child protective services so much that my faith in these type of agencies is an all-time low. Just a small aside to say, I didn't want her to be completely reprimanded. If it happened later, and in this case it did, that was somebody else's business, not mine. So I went to the vice principal who was in charge of scheduling, and I said, look, I don't want her job. I don't want to make trouble. I want out of her class. And they had me transferred. That was on a Wednesday. They had me transferred by Friday. Well, here's the irony of the whole thing, because karma kind of came around and bit her in the tail, right? So for the rest of my, that was 10th grade year. For the rest of 10th grade year, 11th grade year, 12th grade year, she would cross the hall when she saw me coming, right? Like she would just zoom. She didn't even want to be in the same place with me because somebody must have told her that I filed a complaint. Fast forward, I'm 2 years out of high school, and a friend of mine who still had connections with the school because he did some volunteer work calls me and says, "Did you know Miss Nash got fired?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, remember what she did to you?" I was like, "How could I forget?" And then he said, "Well, she did it to a kid that was paralyzed from the neck down, and his parents flipped the blankety blank out, and she got fired for it." So, like, that's one of the things in life when it comes to bullies and coping with bullies. If you can wait it out, more often than not, karma will get them and kick them so hard in the head they can't function. Sometimes it takes years to get there, but it does happen. So at the same time, I'm getting involved in broadcasting and professional wrestling at the same time as I'm getting bullied, right? And so I'm 15 years old, and and I'll tell this story, and then I'll close with this one. But so I'm 15 years old, and I made a mistake of saying to the promoter, if there's ever an opportunity, I'd love to do play-by-play. I'd love to do commentary. Like, I had fantasized about doing this since I was 7 or 8 years old, and I knew I'd never wrestle because I can't walk, but I was like, I can get involved in the business that way. I can talk, and I'm good at talking, and et cetera and so forth, right? And so I'll never forget this. The way this unfolds is a hilarious story. So I show up to this event we have planned, and it's at this like outdoor recreational park / ranch kind of thing. And I show up, and there's like a grand total of 6 people there, and I think 2 of them paid. But it gets worse because the promoter, who was about as smart as a box of rocks, had hired a $3,000 film crew for the day. So he didn't sell advance tickets, but he employed a film crew. And so, you know, like, he comes to me, it's like, "Hey, Scott, just an FYI, kid, you wanted to try this." Now, let me just set the scene a little bit more. Have you ever seen a really bad gangster movie with the guy with the derby hat and the bad hairpiece and the trench coat, and he's like looking like he's walking around like he's Fuglicious? Well, that was this promoter. And so he comes up to me and says, "Hey, kid, you wanted that opportunity. You got it if you want it." "Really?" "Yeah, my son's caught on the interstate, and he's not going to be here in time, and I'm not wasting this camera crew." "Okay, how much prep time you're on in 5 minutes." So I'm about to live my dream, and I've got 300 seconds to prepare. And so, I mean, I go on and I do it and whatever, and I'm awful by standards of anybody who's ever heard the English language, but I got through it. And so I'm like kind of proud of myself, kind of scared, kind of dealing with the other part of one of my side effects of my disability. I guess I call it a side effect, is I have what's known as body dysmorphic disorder, and that is a thing, and solidarity out to anybody who has body image challenges. I'm 38. I'm still dealing with mine. I win more days than I lose, but even now I still lose some days, and I'm determined to deal with it in 2020 in a new way. So anyhow, this guy, and he's a wrestler, and he's kind of nationally known, or about to try to be nationally. I guess let me say it this way. He was regionally known. He was known all over the states where I grew up, and probably everywhere within 500 miles of where I grew up. And he comes up to me, "Hey, kid, who's blankety blank did you have to blankety blank to get that opportunity?" Inferring that I had performed sexual favors for the promoter. And then it spread around because I was like, "I didn't do," and like my voice is cracking, and I'm ashamed because I'm like it's being inferred in front of this whole new group of people that I would do that sort of thing. And I'm, especially being a sexual abuse survivor, I'm really sensitive about that, right? And so it spreads around the whole locker room full of guys. And I became known for a little while, probably about 6 months, as Favor Boy, because of that level of thing. And other people would have been smart enough to quit. I wasn't. I love broadcasting so much. And as a small aside, to tie the whole story together, remember earlier in the conversation, I talked about being transferred out of that English class. Well, I got transferred, and the universe must have been smiling at me because it was the best teacher I'd ever had that I got transferred to her class instead. And for those that don't know, when you have a brain injury, different parts of the brain can be affected. For me, the part that deals with written language has been affected. I can speak at a college level, been able to do this since about 5th grade, but I spell at like a 2nd grade level. And there'd been made allowances for that, something between how my brain interprets written language and how I see it and experience it is different than the reality of what's there. Thankfully, now in 2020, we have things like voice recognition software and Grammarly and things that, for the most part, no one would ever know that I had that struggle unless I tell them. But back in the early 90s or late 90s, it was a much different world. So anyway, this teacher pulls me aside and she says, they want me to work on grammar rules and language with you. And I was like, okay. So she, much to her credit, and I will use her real name this way, her name was Mrs. Smith. And she was, if there's ever been an angel on earth, she might be it. Because she was so patient with me, and she'd come in early before school, and she'd stay late after school, and she'd give up her free periods, and she is what a teacher is supposed to be. So, after trying to relearn basic language rules for 4 months, pulls me aside one day and she says, Scott, you've done everything you can do. You're not going to learn this, and that's okay. She says, but you have a gift that other people don't have. I said, what's that? And she goes, you can speak to a room full of people about anything and have them sitting on the edge of their seat. And I'm like, well, that's because I'm so ugly they're about to fall on the floor. And she looks at me and she gives me this stern look because she knows I'm being sarcastic because I didn't get compliments well then. And so she's like, no, I'm dead serious. She's like, look, this is language, and how you write is your weakness. How you speak is your strength. And it's in great part due to her encouragement to get into a job where I could cover my weakness of not being able to write well and being able to speak really well. She was a contributing factor, and I'll tell a story on another audio about the other people in my life. There were 2 other people that encouraged me to get into speaking roles, and I wouldn't be the person I am today without these 3 people in my life. But anyway, I just wanted to share that with you. I know this was more a bully story time video, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed it, if there's other things you'd like to know about what it's like to live life in a wheelchair, what it's like to have cerebral palsy, what it's like to make it in the world despite those challenges, if that's something you're interested in, I do want to add that and incorporate that to part of the channel. But thank you to Molly Burke for probably being one of the most awesome women on the planet right now, because if she hadn't had the courage to share, I wouldn't have done this audio. And so go check her channel out, Molly Burke, on YouTube. She's got a audiobook or 2. I think she's got 2, and they're on my meaning to order list. So go patronize those. Go purchase those, because number 1, she's a really good speaker. Number 2, the courage it takes to be transparent about your story is Herculean, and she does it, and she grand slams it out of the park. And I haven't even listened to the audiobooks yet, but I know they're compelling content, and so you deserve to share that with yourself and go check those out. But anyway, I probably will do at least one more audio today if I come to think of it. I've got some other things to do and some clients to deal with. But this has been Scott Golden with Golden Opportunities Coaching. If you've dealt with bullying or you're dealing with it now and you'd like some assistance with that, please feel free to contact me to set up a private session here on YouTube. Just go drop in the DM box, or you can contact me at PO Perception on Twitter. Follow me there, and I remind you, keep your feet on the ground, your mind in the moment. Until next time, everybody, please like, subscribe, and retweet this so that we can let people know that they're not alone in being bullied. Take care, keep your feet on the ground, your mind in the moment. Until next time, everybody.